Now our next component to build is the Geofence request object. So back in our code, in the geofencing.java class, we'll add a private helper method called getGeofencingRequest, which uses the geofencingRequest.builder method to build up our geofence request. Now when building out a geofence request, you need to specify something called an initial trigger. So this trigger defines what happens in case the device was already inside any of the geofences that we're about to register. So here I've set our initial trigger to be the constant initial trigger enter, which basically means if the device is already inside a geofence at the time of registering, then trigger an entry transition event immediately. Another option I could have used would have been initial trigger dwell, which triggers the entry event only if the device has been inside the geofence for some duration of time. And then to complete the geofencing request, we add the geofences to the array list we created, and then build it using builder.build. Now to create our next component, the pending intent, we need to first create and extend the broadcast receiver class. So first in the project, create a class called Geofence Broadcast Receiver. So I've gone ahead and already created that setup here. So inside Geofence Broadcast Receiver, we override the onReceive method. And all we're going to do here now is simply log a message. So since we're extending the broadcast receiver class, we need to add a new receiver tag in our manifest file. Alright, so that finishes it up for the Geofence broadcast receiver. Now back to our geofencing class. We'll need to create a helper method called getGeofencePendingIntent that will create our pending intent for us. So inside this method, we'll first create an intent for our Geofence broadcast receiver class. Then the method pendingIntent.getBroadcast is used to create the pending intent. We can also cache this pending intent to reuse it every time rather than creating a new one. Perfect, so now with all this set up, we're going to pull it all together and register our geofences. Let's do so in a new public method that we'll call registerAllGeofences. I'm going to add this code up toward the top of our geofencing class. So inside registerAllGeofences, we start with some sanity checks to make sure that our Google API client is actually connected and that we actually have some geofences to register. Then we can call locationservices.geofencingapi.addGeofences, passing in the client and the results of our two helper methods, getGeofencingRequest and getGeofencePendingIntent. We'll set the callback class to this, which means we need to implement the result callback interface. So I'll do that up here in the class definition. And because I've implemented this class, I'll need to override onResult. So for my setup of onResult, I've logged an error message here. So we're almost all set up now with our geofencing class. But there's one more thing we need to do here. We need to set up an unregisterAllGeofences method. I'll add this in right under registerAllGeofences. So you might notice unregisterAllGeofences is actually slightly simpler than registerAllGeofences, and this is because it doesn't require a geofencing request. Here we use locationservices.geofencingapi.removeGeofences to remove all geofences created using the specified pending intent. So with that final method, that wraps it up for our geofencing.java class. So here we've provided a way to register and unregister our geofences, update the list of geofences, create a geofencing request object, and set up a way to get a geofence pending intent object. Now it's time to set it all up in main activity, and then we can watch the magic happen. So first, in main activity, we need to create an instance of the geofencing class inside the onCreate method. Then we'll need to set up a main enable switch to allow the user to turn the geofences on and off whenever they want. I'll add the switch code here right after I've set up the recycler view. So the UI for this switch is already provided for you in the starter code. You will, however, need to initialize the state of the switch in the main activities onCreate method. You'll need to create a Boolean shared preference to remember that state and to make sure the switch is always reflecting the value of that shared preference. Next, we'll need to set the check change listener so that whenever the switch is turned on or off, you get an updated shared preference value, as well as register or unregister all geofences depending on the state of that switch. Notice that I've also set a private member called m_is_enabled, and that allows me to keep track of the state of the switch later on in the code. And finally, to handle registering any new places that get added to the list, inside Refresh Places Data, I'll make sure that the geofence list is up to date by calling Update Geofence List, and then call Register All Geofences only if the switch is enabled. So here in Refresh Places Data, I'll add that in here inside its on result. Cool, so now it's all there. Let's take a look and see if it all works. But wait a second, how are we actually supposed to test this? Does this mean we have to go outside? You know, it's just another perfectly beautiful day here in California, so why would we ever want to do that? Well, luckily for us, we'll take a look at a different way to fake GPS information in the next node, and we'll see how we can test our app without actually physically going outside.